Good. Okay, let's begin then, if you're happy to do so. So we're counting this, or this should be counted as the third lecture. So that is to say, the first lecture was the first lecture to be given on summer course. The second lecture was the one we did last month. So this is the third. All right? And as you know, RISSHO ANKOKU RON means securing peace in the land through propagation of true Buddhism. But I much prefer myself, I believe, the more accurate translation, really, which is securing peace in the land through establishing the ultimate truth. To me, this is much more direct and somehow much more meaningful. Securing peace in the land through establishing the ultimate truth. The last lecture we studied that very short question 2. So I'll just ask John to read it once again to sort of lead into what's coming today.
The guest said, "These disasters that befall the empire, these calamities of the nation, I am not the only one pained by them. The whole populace is weighed down with sorrow. Now I have been privileged to enter your home and to listen to these enlightening words of yours. You speak of the gods and sages taking leave, and of disasters and calamities arising side by side. Upon what sutras do you base your views? Could you describe for me the passages of proof?"
So the traveller, I think, in this question tells the host a little bit resentfully, I'm not the only one pained by them. In other words, pained by the incredible, incessant disasters that have been occurring for so many long years in Japan at that time. He says the whole populace is weighed down with sorrow, as much as to say, it's not only me that's involved in this thing. And remember, the traveller was Hojo Tokiyori, the most powerful man in Japan. He was really saying, like, it's not only me that's involved, we're all in the same boat. It's not really my fault, in other words. And, of course, the whole purpose of the rest of the RISSHO ANKOKU RON is to show him that, to some extent, it is all his fault, because he's allowing the wrong teachings to be spread throughout the land of Japan. And then Nichiren Daishonin had said just before that question, he'd said, the people of today all turn their backs on what is right. Do you remember? To a man they give their allegiance to evil. That is why, Nichiren Daishonin was saying, all these disasters are occurring. So inevitably this was a jolt to the traveller, especially as he was the ruler of Japan behind the scenes, and ultimately responsible for leading the people of that country. So to say the people of today all turn their backs on what is right is saying your stewardship, your government of Japan is incorrect. So inevitably he was beginning to boil a bit inside. And nevertheless he asks quite politely, could you describe for me the passages of proof? Probably Nichiren Daishonin in describing this scene is conveying the fact that probably Hojo Tokiyori would feel that he couldn't prove it. And this is why he challenged him. The fact that Nichiren Daishonin is saying that the benevolent deities have left the land and been replaced by disasters created by devils and demons. So the traveller is already feeling just a bit uneasy. And so would and may our present day statesmen and politicians, if one day they hear the message of the RISSHO ANKOKU RON. Can you imagine what it would be like if I somehow or other went to see Maggie Thatcher and said to her, you know, all the troubles that are occurring in this country at the moment, the sufferings of the people and so on, are due to our total ignorance of the true law. She looked at me as if I was mad. What's the true law? Then I'd have to go on by saying the whole problem is that because there is a complete lack of wisdom in the government of this country and the way the affairs are being handled, the people are becoming frustrated and apathetic. Their life force is being sapped. By the time I got to there, she would probably have already been on the phone for an ambulance to take me to a mental home. But then I'd have to go on to say to her, in the end, wouldn't I? The only solution is you and your ministers have got to chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. So of course, we know, do we know this is true, what Nichiren Daishonin said? It's because, isn't it, at our own individual level, we've experienced this happening. We've all had experiences where our lives were very negative at some particular point. And somehow that protection wasn't there when we needed it. That's the point, isn't it? So we had these experiences. So you just multiply that by the number of people in the Japanese nation, if you like, and there you have the karma of the nation as a whole. If Maggie Thatcher, for example, had practiced for a few years, she would have come to realize the truth of the RISSHO ANKOKU RON's message, because she'd experienced the same thing happening in her individual life, wouldn't she? This is the point. But without that, it's very difficult for anyone to understand. So Nichiren Daishonin was taking up an unbelievable challenge, wasn't he, when you think about it? Yet he had to do it, to try to convince people who knew nothing about Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, what's more, were not prepared to believe in it. What a challenge he took up. So that sort of actual proof is essential. So this is why from time to time I've said, and I've said it even more than time to time in the New Century group, that sometime in the future, in the not too distant future, I really hope that we will see members going into politics, or we will see politicians, or people who are about to be politicians or statesmen, being shakubuku. Because step by step, people who are responsible for the government of this country, and for that matter, all other countries of the world, have got to begin to see the ignorance of their ways, haven't they? They've got to have their eyes open. So most likely, the people who can do that best are fellow politicians, fellow statesmen who talk the same language and have the guts one day to confess that they've been practicing secretly perhaps, for a couple of years. This is the power, that Nam Myoho Renge Kyo gives you, and so on. That sort of actual proof at an individual level is very, very important. So it comes down to the importance, doesn't it, of shakubuku. So today we're going to do answer 2. Answer 2 is very long, it's several pages, but I hope that we can get the greatness out of it in the time we've got available. But because it's so long, I'm not going to ask John to read the whole thing right through. We'll take it section by section. So in this answer, Nichiren Daishonin selects 4 provisional sutras, 4 pre-Lotus Sutra sutras. He selected these sutras because they were well known in Japan, which, remember, is a Buddhist country. So historically, the people, or certainly the educated people and the scholars of Japan, would have known of these 4 sutras, and what's more, respected them, because they had been part of the culture, if you like, of the country. So that is to say, the Konkomyo Sutra, the Daijuku Sutra, the Ninno Sutra, and the Yakushi Sutra. So in selecting these provisional sutras, rather than basing his teaching on the Lotus Sutra, of course he was doing pure shakubuku. He was recognizing the religious beliefs that existed in that country up to that particular point in time, and therefore talking on a level or based on a foundation which Hojo Tokuyori would understand. Preparation, isn't it, therefore, before the revelation comes. And also, he chose these 4 provisional sutras because they explain in considerable detail the 3 calamities and 7 disasters. Incidentally, each of these sutras explains the 3 calamities and 7 disasters in a slightly different way, or in a different order. But nevertheless, the list, which unfortunately we haven't got here tonight, but you almost know it backwards, I think, already. But that list, which is also in the glossary of the Gosho, that is actually a sort of average of the calamities and disasters as described in those 4 important and famous provisional sutras. So we'll now start to study this, and please do bear in mind all the time that although this is referring to the scene in Japan at that time, of course now it refers to the scene in the whole wide world. There is no such thing, is there, really, as a happy country anymore. You can't think, I'm sure, of a country in the world that is actually happy, a totally happy country, or a totally happy people. And disasters, of course, are escalating. They've even escalated since we came back from summer course. We've had Birmingham and Brixton and Peckham and Tottenham. Before summer course we had all those football disasters, and we've had recently some very bad air and road crashes. Unemployment is still as bad as it ever was, and Northern Ireland still exists. So there's frustration and despair often, and certainly apathy everywhere. People concerned about the situation. People of this country are not by and large extremists. They don't like extremes. So when these sort of things happen, it upsets people deeply. Even children get upset, let alone older people. And in Europe too, we've also again seen very recently an escalation. So I just jotted down a few. The riots in Germany, which occurred almost the same time as the riots here, and terrorism in Belgium, previously a few months ago in France. Terrible droughts, though we've read not so much about them. But as you know, I was in Rome just before I went to Japan, and they were very seriously and deeply worried about the total lack of rain for months and months in Italy and southern Europe in general. While we in northern Europe have had rather a cold summer, they've had blistering heat. And of course, acid rain is still pouring down in various places in Europe. The list is endless, isn't it? Go on and on with it. So all over the world it's the same. So let's take first of all the Konkomyo Sutra. Beginning middle of page 6, the host said, and here he cites from the Konkomyo Sutra, which Konkomyo is actually in English a sutra known as the Sutra of the Enlightened King. Not that that helps you very much. Or the Golden Light Sutra. Okay, John will read.
The host said, there are numerous passages that could be cited and a wide variety of proofs. For example, in the Konkomyo Sutra we read, the 4 heavenly kings said to the Buddha, though this sutra exists in the nation, the rulers have never allowed it to be propagated. In their hearts they turn away from it. They take no pleasure in hearing its teachings. They do not serve it, respect it, or sing its praises, nor are they willing to respect or give material support to the 4 kinds of Buddhists who embrace the sutra. In the end, they have made it impossible for us and the countless other heavenly beings who are our followers to hear the teachings of this profound and wonderful Dharma. They have deprived us of the sweet dew of its words and cut us off from the flow of the true law, so that our majesty and strength are drained away. Thus, the number of beings who occupy the 4 evil paths increases, and the number who enjoy the human and heavenly states decreases. People fall into the river of birth and death and turn their backs on the road to nirvana. World-honored one, we, the 4 heavenly kings, as well as our various followers and the yakshas and other beings, observing this state of affairs, have decided to abandon this nation, for we have no more heart to protect it. And it is not we alone who cast aside these rulers. All the great benevolent deities who guard and watch over the countless different regions of the country will also invariably reject them. And once we and the others have abandoned and deserted this nation, then many different types of disasters will occur in the country and the rulers will fall from power. Not a single person in the entire population will possess a heart of goodness. There will be nothing but binding and enslaving, killing and injuring, anger and contention. Men will slander each other or fawn upon one another, and the laws will be twisted until even the innocent are made to suffer. Pestilence will become rampant. Comets will appear again and again. Two suns will come forth side by side, and eclipses will occur with unaccustomed frequency. Black arcs and white arcs will span the sky as harbingers of ill fortune. Stars will fall, the earth will shake, and noises will issue from the wells. Torrential rains and violent winds will come out of season. There will be constant famine, and grains and fruits will not ripen. Marauders from many other regions will invade and plunder the nation. The people will suffer all manner of pain and affliction, and there will be no place where one may live in safety.
Thank you. So, sometimes one reads that Nichiren Daishonin was like a prophet of the Old Testament, the Bible. He was a prophet, there's no doubt about that, but he was nothing like the prophets of the Old Testament in the Bible, was he? Because the prophets of the Old Testament never gave a solution to the problems that they foresaw ahead, whereas Nichiren Daishonin explained in the most immense detail what the solution was. So as I said, these three sutras, including this one, the Konkomyo Sutra, were well known historically, and in fact the Lotus Sutra and the Ninno Sutra, together with this Konkomyo Sutra, were the sutras that were revered as being the sutras to protect Japan in the Heian period, that famous period, starting around 600 or 700 AD, when Japan went through its most glorious period in history. So it was at that time that this sutra was well known. So I'll ask John now just to read the first part, which is that I want to discuss, which is on page 6, about 3/4 of the way through.
In the end, they have made it impossible for us and the countless other heavenly beings who are our followers to hear the teachings of this profound and wonderful Dharma. They have deprived us of the sweet dew of its words and cut us off from the flow of the true law, so that our majesty and strength are drained away. Thus, the number of beings who occupy the four evil paths increases, and the number who enjoy the human and heavenly states decreases.
I think this is the most beautiful wording and explanation of what happens to the Buddhist gods, the Shoten Zenjin, when our life force dies away. The rulers of the nation, they say, have deprived us of the sweet dew of its words. This is the four heavenly kings speaking. The four heavenly kings on the four corners of the gods. They have deprived us of the sweet dew of its words and cut us from the flow of the true law, so that our majesty and strength are drained away. Very beautifully put. The great protectors who are, provided we manifest strong life force, will ensure our protection together with the other Buddhist gods. But sadly, their majesty and strength had gone because the life force of the people had drained away, and they were no longer able to feed that life force to the forces of the universe or the Buddhist gods. So as you know, the Shoten Zenjin feed on that life force. If our life is positive, then the Shoten Zenjin will also be positive, feeding on our own positive force. Whereas if our life is negative, then the Shoten Zenjin will have no power. And it's as if they've disappeared from our lives. So multiply that again by all the people of a nation, and you have the situation in Japan at that time, or in the world today. And it's a vicious circle, isn't it? Japan at that time was negative. These disasters had begun, and they made it much worse. The world today is negative. And the more disasters come in Europe or in this country, the more despair and stress and strain and upset the people will feel. Therefore, their life force is draining away, isn't it? And it's only the positive force of human beings that can be turned on at will if people know how to turn it on, isn't it? In order to re-establish that life force. Only human beings can do it. Insects and birds and animals can't. Only human beings can switch on Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, provided they know about it. And if they don't, of course, then there's nothing we can do about it. So this, of course, is the unbelievable importance of Shakabuku. That as much life force as possible can be generated or switched on in this country of ours, if these disasters are going to cease escalating. So, in that sense, we have to rectify the balance of life force in this land. So I think it was during summer course I mentioned Mr. Toda's, his vivid picture in his mind of when he does the first prayer every day. Because the first prayer every day is when you connect with all the Buddhist gods. Your life through that prayer connects with them for the first time that particular day. And your ichinen connects with them and directs the life force to them. And Mr. Toda used to say that when he sat down and began to do Gonga, in that first prayer in the morning, he felt as if all the Buddhist gods were lining up on either side of him. And as he bowed to the gongs, all the Buddhist gods bowed with him. Of course, what he was describing was Eshofuni, wasn't it? Eshofuni is totally applicable to this situation. It's through our own life force that it reflects into our environment to the Buddhist gods. And only human beings can do this. This is the point. Only humans can rectify, of course, what is happening to the world today. We can either destroy the world or we can save it. It's just black and white, like everything else in Buddhism, isn't it? There's no grey area. But this needs life force. But I know that Christianity does not give you life force. It may give you a little spiritual feeling of satisfaction, but not powerful life force, such as exudes, from a person who is chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Nothing like it. So only this can do it. Only Nam-myoho Renge-kyo can do it. Where else will you find a religion that does it? Roman Catholicism doesn't. And I went to the Vatican. There's that feeling of sort of heaviness and drabness. You don't feel things are heavy and drab when you walk into the Richmond Centre or into any other, community centre or culture centre of Nichiren, wherever in the world. So it has to be us who do it. This is the incredible importance of our mission, isn't it? Then, on page 7, about a third of the way down, let's have a look at some of those lines, John.
Men will slander each other or fawn upon one another, and the laws will be twisted until even the innocent are made to suffer.
So this is beginning to refer to the calamity of inflation. You remember the three calamities: inflation, pestilence, and war. Right? This refers to inflation. Social upset or upheaval due to corrupt politics. or corrupt people who are of influence in society. In other words, the three poisons at work of anger, greed, and stupidity. So not always this is done knowingly by governments and states. It's the poison often of ignorance that causes inflation. But also it can be the poison of greed, very much so. And unwittingly, the government, through lack of wisdom, are stifling the freedom of the people. This is what people feel, and this is why many of them can't contain it and overflow with anger and frustration due to the pressures brought to bear on the way of living. We're fortunate in this country. Of course, there are other countries that have a far more oppressive system than we do. The very fact of unemployment in itself is a constant pressure, isn't it? It's something which drains people's life force because it takes away their hope. So this is all due to ignorance, lack of wisdom. And it is basically a breakdown of relations, isn't it, between one person and another, between the government and the people, or between even one aspect of government and another aspect of government. A total breakdown of harmonious and productive relations between, you could say, humans and humans, or man and man. So this is why, again, there is a great importance in the future of seeing members going into politics. It doesn't matter which party they go into, as long as they're using the gons and the wisdom that they gain from it. And through that, bringing a new slant or a new dimension to everything. And then he goes on to pestilence.
Pestilence will become rampant.
I think it's enough. Pestilence will become rampant. Another calamity. And pestilence is a breakdown of relations between man or a person and himself or herself. So inflation is a social upheaval between one person and another, or one group of people and another. But pestilence is a breakdown of a person with himself or with herself. Through strain and stress arising from the pressures of life, arising from these natural disasters, arising indeed through wrong religions too, or no religion at all. People get out of balance, distressed inside them, deep inside them. And this causes both physical sickness and, of course, to an increasing degree, mental sickness. So this is a fact of life, isn't it? And we see this around us. Although medical science is advancing so incredibly, it's not actually keeping the hospitals clear. The hospitals are fuller now than they were probably 30 or 40 years ago. That's a fact. And it's due to life. A lot of it is due to life. The fact that alcoholism, drug abuse and so on is on the increase is due to this situation. People can't take it. A certain type of people cracks and turns to alcohol or turns to drugs to try to escape from it. And then he deals a little later with our relationship, the human being's relationship with the environment.
The earth will shake and noises will issue from the wells. Torrential rains and violent winds will come out of season. There will be constant famine, and grains and fruits will not ripen.
Gives one the creeps in a way, doesn't it? But we can read about it in the papers every day in various parts of the world. The breakdown of human beings' relationship with the land or with their environment. Of course we see that most outstandingly in Africa, in the famine of Ethiopia and in the Horn of Africa. This is man-made. It's not a natural thing. is due to the poisons, of course, of ignorance on the one hand and greed on the other. Over-exploitation often of the soil by those who are greedy, or an inability to know what to do in the face of difficult times, so far as the soil is concerned, which is ignorance. So a shortage of food, in turn, leads always to inflation. Wherever there is a food shortage, there will be someone who is storing it away in a secret warehouse until the price goes up and up and up and they can make the biggest profit. So that means that whereas food is wanted generally, it's actually being stored by certain unscrupulous people in warehouses all over the world. So even though Ethiopia was starving, and even though a great deal of incredible charity work was done, there were stores of food in all sorts of parts of the world that could have been used, but were not used because people were waiting for the price to escalate, while they stood and watched millions die. It's unbelievable, but it's true. So business and commerce is the world of animality and greed a lot of the time, isn't it? So greed also, in many of the underdeveloped countries, greed in terms of the greed for power of the leaders of those countries, who in order to gain popularity in the early days of their existence as a nation, after they managed to shake off the colonial rule, in order to gain popularity, instead of pouring what money they had into agriculture and agricultural training, they poured it into luxury goods. Washing machines, televisions, radios, and so on. To please the people. And of course, in their ignorance, the people were delighted to buy those things, not realizing that they were putting a noose around their necks, really. So in so many different ways, this poison of greed is at work, the most insidious thing, and preying on people who lacked education and understanding. And in the West too, as you know, the EEC has all these mountains, butter mountains, milk mountains, wine mountains, goodness knows what else. Same thing, isn't it, really? Then he deals a bit with war.
Marauders from many other regions will invade and plunder the nation. The people will suffer all manner of pain and affliction, and there will be no place where one may live in safety.
There will be no place where one may live in safety. It's an awful thought, isn't it? But in a way, it's beginning to get that way, still on a small group or individual level. It's not so safe to walk the streets these days in London. Fortunately, so far, we haven't seen terrorism really at work in this country except through the IRA. We certainly saw it there. But other countries have suffered dreadfully from it, with fear. Also, assassinations. Mrs. Gandhi of India not so long ago. And then, of course, those riots, which weren't as simple as they could have been. That is to say, there were other people standing on the fringe who, when the riots occurred, due to frustration of youth to a great degree in the racial problem, then the gangsters, the looters, are in, aren't they, to make a killing and to gain as much as they can from it. So even with the minor strife, it seems that the leaders were thinking, if they didn't actually do it, of financing themselves from Libya. Libya, which is the headquarters of world terrorism. So people go to great lengths, not realizing how disastrous their actions are a lot of the time. There will be no place where one may live in safety. At this moment, on some certain notorious housing estates in London, there is hardly any place where people can live in safety. They hardly dare go out of their homes to a movie or to the bingo hall in the evening. This is the reality, isn't it? So, perhaps you've gathered, and I gave you all, I think you've all been given a little handout, that the three calamities are actually directly due to the three poisons, which I think has come out clearly in those examples which Nichiren Daishonin gave in the gosho. The three poisons, of course, arise from the four evil paths, the four lower worlds: hell, hunger, anger, animality. So, if you consider the theory of Ichiren Sanze and Honmatsukyoto, the consistency of everything from beginning to end, you'll understand that if your life is filled with greed, then inevitably that greed will express itself with absolute consistency through all 3,000 worlds of Ichiren Sanzen, and in particular, in the examples which I gave, in the three realms of man and himself, human beings and themselves, their inner selves, human beings and society, and human beings and the land or environment on which they live. So there is absolute consistency in this from beginning to end. So this arises through the three poisons being rampant in people's lives. And I think we're all clear, all of us, that the only way we know how to challenge those three poisons is through the human revolution. No other way one knows that is certain to win. So the three realms of man and himself, human beings and themselves, human beings and human beings, that is to say society, and human beings and their environment. So this is how those three poisons become manifest in the three calamities as described in these sutras. So now let's go on and look at the Daijuku Sutra. John will read again.
The Daijuku Sutra says, when the principles of Buddhism truly become obscured and lost, then people will let all their beards, hair and fingernails grow long, and the laws of the world will be forgotten and ignored. At that time, loud noises will sound in the air, and the earth will shake. Everything in the world will begin to move as though it were a water wheel. City walls will split and tumble, and all houses and dwellings will collapse. Roots, branches, leaves, petals and fruits will lose their medicinal properties. With the exception of the 5 highest heavens in the world of form, all the regions of the worlds of form and desire will become deprived of the 7 flavors and the 3 essences that nourish life and human society, until nothing remains alive anymore. All the good discourses that lead men to emancipation will at this time disappear. The flowers and fruits that grow in the earth will become few and will lose their flavor and sweetness. The wells, springs and ponds will all go dry. The land everywhere will turn brackish and will crack open and warp into hillocks and gullies. All the mountains will be swept by fire, and the heavenly dragons will no longer send down rain. The crops will all wither and die. All living creatures will perish, and even the grass will cease to grow anymore. Dust will rain down until all is darkness, and the sun and the moon no longer shed their light. All the 4 directions will be afflicted by drought, and evil omens will appear again and again. The 10 kinds of evil behavior will increase greatly, particularly greed, anger and stupidity, and people will think no more of their fathers and mothers than does the roe deer. Living beings will decline in numbers, in longevity, physical power and enjoyment. They will become estranged from the pleasures of human and heavenly existence, and all will fall into the evil states of existence. The wicked rulers and monks who perform these 10 kinds of evil behavior will destroy the true law of the Buddha and make it impossible for sentient beings to be born in the human and heavenly states of existence. At that time, the various benevolent deities and heavenly rulers, who would ordinarily take pity on living beings, will abandon this nation of confusion and evil, and all will make their way to other regions.
So clear, isn't it, this proof that he was giving to the traveller. So this sutra, of course, again refers to the 3 calamities and the 7 disasters. Also, out of your interest, this is the sutra, the Daijuku Sutra, where the predictions of Shoho, Zoho, and Mappo are made by Shakyamuni Buddha, and the 500-year periods, and also the great significance of the latter day of the law, the age when the great pure law would appear. This is all in this same Daijuku Sutra. So it's quite an important provisional sutra. And first of all, really throughout this particular passage, Nichiren Daishonin is pointing out the effect on all aspects of society of the 3 calamities, or if you like, the 3 poisons at work. So just ask John to read again back near the beginning.
When the principles of Buddhism truly become obscured and lost, then people will all let their beards, hair and fingernails grow long, and the laws of the world will be forgotten and ignored.
Look at my fingernails. No beards? No long ones, anyway. So this is referring to the outward effect or the appearance of internal stress and confusion. Again, it's honmatsukukuto, consistency from beginning to end. If the inner life of someone is disturbed and confused and distressed, then it will have its effect in that person's outward appearance. So outward appearance in terms of the 10 factors, that is nyose so, right? Of nyose so, nyose sho, nyose tai. So nyose so is the outward appearance. And this is inevitable if the inner side of a person's life, which is nyose sho and nyose tai, if that is distressed. So if, in other words, the true law, or Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, is not Buddhahood, if you like, is not occupying the entity of that, of a life, then because of that, the 3 poisons may take charge. The other worlds, in other words. So inevitably we'll be adversely affected. And that, in other words, our spirit, nyose sho, will be distressed, causing our outward appearance to reveal it, which is nyose so. So untidiness, uncleanliness, not taking care of your nails or hair, not looking after ourselves, a lack of pride, all these things become manifest in times of difficulty and stress. And we've seen that in society, of course, in the last 30 or 40 years. A sensei once said, nyose so, the appearance, is living outward proof of happiness or unhappiness. So, of course, for those of us who practice to the Gohonzon, what we reveal in our outward appearance is the power of that Gohonzon, or the power of that Buddha state of work, isn't it? We don't have to put on an act or be self-righteous. And we often don't even realize that our life in some way shines compared to other people. And therefore people are attracted to us, rather like a beacon in the dark. The senses often described it like that. When people first go to a discussion meeting, they're attracted, aren't they, by the atmosphere. This is nothing else but the nyose so, the outward appearance of the Buddha state. which is deep in everyone's lives and which we're motivating, manifesting through Gongyo and Dhammokara. So we don't have to, as I say, put on an act to produce that. And then, let's go on, John, to 2b.
At that time, loud noises will sound in the air, and the earth will shake. Everything in the world will begin to move as though it were a water wheel. City walls will split and tumble, and all houses and dwellings will collapse.
Yes,
Roots, branches, leaves, petals and fruits will lose their medicinal properties.
I'm laughing because roots, branches, leaves, petals and fruits will lose their medicinal properties. And you see that so much, don't you, today, in many of the sort of goods that we have to buy in shops. And the difference between free range